My wife told me marriage wasn't supposed to feel passionate forever, like she was explaining the weather to a child. Calm. Certain. Almost kind. I sat there nodding like a man trying to be mature, while something in me quietly started to die. Claire said it on a Thursday night in our kitchen, with one hand around a mug of tea and the other scrolling through her phone. The dishwasher was running. The house smelled like lemon detergent and roasted chicken. It should have felt warm. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like I was being gently talked out of my own marriage. She didn't say it cruelly. That was the part that made it worse. She said passion fades. She said real love changes shape. She said what matters after enough years is partnership, stability, shared responsibility. She said all of it in that soft, measured voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable enough that disagreeing with her made me feel dramatic. We had been married 11 years by then. I was 39. Claire was 37. We had no kids, not because we hated the idea, but because life kept moving the goalposts. Her job got more demanding. My father got sick for a while. Then we bought the house. Then rates went up, money got tight, and somehow our future kept getting postponed until it started to feel rude to bring it up. For a long time, I told myself we were still solid. We were the kind of couple other people probably thought was stable. No screaming matches. No slammed doors. No public scenes. We paid our bills on time. We remembered birthdays. We hosted dinner twice a year. We sent out a decent Christmas card. From the outside, we looked like two adults doing marriage correctly. From the inside, it felt like I was slowly being put on a shelf. It hadn't always been like that. Claire used to reach for me without thinking. In grocery store lines, at red lights, while brushing her teeth, while I was half asleep. We used to have our own dumb language made of looks and little touches. She used to laugh faster. Lean into me faster. There was a looseness to us, something alive. I didn't even notice exactly when that changed. It wasn't one moment. It was more like winter settling in 1 degree at a time. First, she got tired more often. Then she got distracted. Then she started treating affection like something that needed to fit into a schedule. Then even small touches started feeling like interruptions. If I kissed her neck while she was making coffee, she'd shift away slightly and smile like I was a puppy underfoot. If I put a hand on her waist while we watched TV, she'd move to adjust a blanket or reach for the remote. Not enough to start a fight. Just enough to make me feel foolish for noticing. Every few weeks, I tried to bring it up carefully. Not accusing. Not needy. At least I tried not to sound that way. I'd tell her I missed us. I'd say I felt distance. I'd ask if something was wrong, if she was stressed, if I'd done something. Every time, Claire had an answer ready. Work had been intense. She was mentally drained. Hormones were weird. Life was heavy. Marriage settles. This is adulthood. Stop romanticizing the early years. That last part stayed with me. Stop romanticizing the early years. I started repeating her explanations to myself when I was alone, almost like medication. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what happened when people were together long enough. Maybe movies and old memories had warped my expectations. Maybe love did survive after desire burned off. Maybe wanting more closeness made me immature. Selfish, even. So I adjusted. I stopped initiating as much. Then I stopped almost entirely. I helped more around the house, not because I thought folding towels would fix my marriage, but because I kept thinking maybe pressure was the problem, maybe if she felt lighter, she'd come back to me on her own. I handled groceries more often. Took care of the yard without asking. Started doing those quiet little husband things with the pathetic hope that kindness still counted for something. Claire seemed to appreciate it in the way people appreciate a reliable appliance. She thanked me. She smiled. She asked me to pick up dry cleaning, to call the plumber, to look at a weird charge on the credit card. She could still depend on me. She just didn't seem to want me. That difference started eating at me. I remember one Saturday morning especially clearly. She had come back from getting coffee with her friend Nina. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail that used to undo me. She walked into the kitchen with this bright, easy energy I hadn't seen directed at me in months. She was talking faster than usual, animated, almost glowing. I said something stupid and simple. I told her she looked happy. She glanced at me, still smiling, and said she was just enjoying a rare quiet morning. Then I stepped closer and put a hand on her hip. Nothing dramatic. Just familiar. Husband-level affection in my own kitchen. Her whole body changed. Not violently. Not obviously. But enough. That brightness disappeared like a switch got flipped behind her eyes. She peeled my hand away and said she hadn't even showered yet. Then she moved past me to rinse out her cup. I stood there like an idiot, my hand still half raised. A few minutes later she was chatting with me again, but the warmth was gone. It was like I'd crossed some invisible line by forgetting the rules. That night I asked her directly if she still found me attractive. She let out a slow breath, like the question itself was exhausting. Then she told me I was making this too physical. She said marriage can't survive if everything gets reduced to chemistry. She said people who expect constant passion are chasing something unrealistic. Then she gave me that look I was starting to hate, the one that mixed pity with patience. I asked her if she even missed that part of us. She took a sip of wine before answering. Then she said marriage wasn't supposed to be passionate forever. Not ours. Marriage. In general. Like she was quoting a rule from a book I'd never read. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to argue, but there was something so polished about the way she said it. So complete. She made it sound childish to hope your wife still wanted you after 11 years. Like desire was for beginners, and I was embarrassing myself by not evolving. That was the genius of it, I guess. She never had to reject me outright. She just had to make me feel unsophisticated for still wanting what we used to have. After that, I stopped bringing it up for a while. Not because I felt reassured. Because I felt ashamed. The house got quieter. We moved around each other with that practiced efficiency long married couples develop when they've learned how to avoid conflict. She worked late more often. I spent more time in the garage pretending to organize tools I wasn't really using. We still ate dinner together most nights, but it started to feel like we were honoring a tradition instead of sharing a life. And yet, every so often, I'd catch glimpses of the old Claire. Not with me. Just near me. A laugh at something on her phone. A flash of playfulness in the mirror while doing her makeup before a work dinner. A sudden interest in a new blouse on a random Tuesday. Little sparks that made no sense alongside everything she kept telling me about how passion naturally disappears. One night she came downstairs wearing a dress I hadn't seen in over a year. Nothing inappropriate. Just fitted enough that it made me remember things I'd been trying not to miss. I looked up from the couch and asked where she was going. She said it was just drinks with people from work. Casual. Nothing special. But then she stood in the hallway mirror longer than usual. Adjusted an earring. Reapplied lipstick with the kind of focus she never seemed to have at home anymore. There was a lightness in her expression, a quiet anticipation. Not duty. Not routine. Something warmer than that. Something I hadn't seen aimed in my direction in a very long time. When she noticed me watching, her face settled immediately. She asked what. I said nothing. She grabbed her coat, told me not to wait up, and left with a smell of perfume that lingered in the entryway long after the door shut. I sat there listening to her car back down the driveway, and for the first time, her little speeches about maturity and long-term love didn't comfort me at all. Because whatever that look on her face had been, it sure as hell didn't look like a woman who believed passion was over. The next few weeks changed something in me, even before I had proof of anything. Up to that point, I had still been trying to explain Claire to myself in the kindest way possible. Stress. Burnout. Age. Routine. All the words she had handed me, I kept turning over in my head like they were puzzle pieces that would eventually fit. But once I noticed that look on her face the night she left for drinks, I couldn't unsee it. It stayed with me. Not because it proved anything by itself, but because it contradicted everything she had been teaching me to accept. According to Claire, passion was what immature people chased before real life set in. According to Claire, stable love was quieter, flatter, more practical. According to Claire, I was clinging to some teenage expectation that no adult marriage could sustain. And yet that night, while standing in front of the hallway mirror, she had not looked flat or practical. She had looked alive. That was what started bothering me most. Not just the distance between us. The selectiveness of it. After that, I started noticing her moods more carefully. I didn't mean to at first. It wasn't some deliberate surveillance. It was just that once doubt got into the room, it sat with me everywhere. At dinner. In the car. On the couch. In bed while she slept facing away from me and I stared at the ceiling trying not to feel pathetic. Claire still treated me with the same measured patience she'd been using for months. She wasn't openly hostile. That almost would have been easier. Instead she was composed. Efficient. Pleasant in controlled doses. She asked about my day. She reminded me about appointments. She sent me links to things the house needed. She thanked me when I fixed things. But every warm moment between us now felt managed. I began to realize she had developed a way of keeping me close enough to be useful, but never close enough to be intimate. One Tuesday evening, I came home earlier than usual because a client meeting got moved. Claire was upstairs getting ready for something she'd described that morning as a boring department dinner. That was her phrase. Boring. Obligatory. One of those work things she supposedly hated. But when I walked into her bedroom to change, she was standing in front of the mirror in a black blouse I had not seen in a long time, doing her makeup with a level of care that didn't match the way she had described the night. She looked at me in the mirror and seemed startled for half a second. Then she smiled and asked why I was home so early. I said the meeting got cancelled. I asked if the dinner was more formal than she expected. She said not really, just that she had felt like putting in a little effort for once. That answer should have been harmless. Maybe it was. But the phrase "for once" stuck with me, because she said it like the effort had to be reserved for someplace else. I told her she looked nice. She gave me a distracted thanks and kept applying mascara. I stood there longer than I needed to, waiting for some opening, some softness, some trace that she noticed how long it had been since I'd seen her try that hard in our shared life. But nothing came. She was already somewhere else in her head. Before she left, she sprayed perfume at her neck and wrists. Same perfume as the other night. Warmer than what she wore during the day. More deliberate. When she passed me in the hallway, I touched her elbow and asked what restaurant they were going to. She said she wasn't sure yet. Someone else had planned it. Then she left without kissing me. I listened to the door close and stood there with that same stupid empty feeling I'd had the first night. Not full panic. Just the slow, humiliating awareness that I was no longer the place her energy naturally moved toward. Little things kept piling up after that. Her phone was suddenly always face down. If she left it charging in the kitchen and a message came in, she'd appear almost immediately, like she had some internal alarm I couldn't hear. If we were watching something together and she got a notification, she'd glance down with this quick private smile and then lock the screen before I could accidentally see even the preview. Once, lying in bed, I heard her phone vibrate on the nightstand. She picked it up, looked at it, and the corner of her mouth twitched in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Not a big smile. Something smaller. More intimate than that. Almost involuntary. I asked who it was. She answered too quickly. Just Nina. Then she put the phone screen down against the wood and turned off her lamp. I believed her for maybe 10 seconds. What made it worse was that Claire still kept offering me the same philosophy whenever I showed the slightest sign of discomfort. She didn't get defensive. She got educational. If I asked why she seemed so distracted lately, she'd say I was reading emotional meaning into normal adult fatigue. If I asked why she had no energy for me but plenty for work dinners and happy hours, she'd say public interaction and private intimacy were completely different things. If I asked whether we were okay, she'd say marriage went through phases and strong couples didn't panic every time closeness changed form. Changed form. That became another one of her phrases. Everything with Claire had turned into a phrase. A polished sentence. A ready-made answer. It was like I was no longer talking to my wife, but to a woman who had spent a long time preparing her side of an argument I didn't know we were having. Then Nina said something that cracked me open a little. It happened on a Saturday afternoon when we ran into her and her husband outside a wine shop downtown. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those suburban collisions where everybody smiles too much and stands around making shallow conversation in the parking lot. Claire had gone inside to grab a second bottle she forgot she wanted. So for maybe a minute, it was just me, Nina, and her husband, Paul. Paul was fumbling with a receipt. Nina was making some comment about how impossible Claire had become lately when it came to choosing restaurants for girls' nights. She was laughing when she said it, but then she looked at me and added that Claire had been in a surprisingly good mood recently. I said I hadn't noticed. Nina gave me a quick look, like she hadn't expected that answer. Then she said Claire had seemed lighter these days. More energized. More like her old self. Her old self. I remember those words exactly because I felt them in my chest. Paul said something to move the conversation along, and Claire came back out before I could respond, but the damage was done. Nina had said it casually, without any agenda. Which meant she believed it. Somewhere outside her house, Claire was apparently lively enough for people to comment on it. That night, I kept replaying the exchange while Claire sat beside me on the couch half watching a show and half texting. I looked at her profile, at the faint expression she wore when reading something on her screen, and I had this horrible thought that maybe the woman I'd been mourning wasn't gone at all. Maybe I was just the only place she had stopped bringing her. A few days later, I saw something even smaller, but somehow it hit harder. Claire was in the laundry room folding clothes while I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes. Her phone was on the counter near me. It lit up with a message preview before I could stop myself from seeing it. I didn't catch the full text. Just a fragment. Needed that tonight. No name. Just the words. Then the screen went dark. My stomach dropped so fast it actually made me grip the sink. A second later Claire walked in, saw where I was looking, and picked up the phone with a calmness that felt practiced. She didn't accuse me of snooping. She didn't even seem flustered. She just tucked the phone into the back pocket of her jeans and asked if I could take the trash out when I had a second. That was almost worse than panic would have been. I asked who had texted. She said a co-worker. I asked about what. She said she had helped cover something at the office and they were thanking her. Then she turned away and started wiping down the counter, like the subject had already expired. I stood there looking at the side of her face, waiting for some sign that she understood how strange it sounded, how strange all of this had started to feel. But she was completely steady. Not warm. Not guilty. Just steady. And that was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Claire wasn't confused about the distance between us. She wasn't sad about it. She wasn't struggling to explain it. She had a system for it. A full vocabulary. A whole worldview designed to make me accept less and call it wisdom. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake in the dark and stared at the faint outline of her shoulder under the blanket. I thought about every speech she had given me over the past year. Passion fades. Marriage changes. Mature love is different. Stop romanticizing the early years. I had been treating those lines like hard truths. For the first time, I considered the possibility that they weren't truths at all. They were cover. And sometime after midnight, with Claire asleep beside me and her phone charging face down across the room, I realized I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was starting to pay attention. I didn't confront Claire after that. That was the first real change. Before, every time something felt off, I went to her with it too early. I brought her my confusion while it was still soft, still shapeless, and she would wrap it in one of her polished explanations until I walked away feeling smaller than when I started. But after that message on the counter, after seeing how calm she was, how ready, I understood I was done asking questions she had already prepared to survive. So I got quiet. Not angry quiet. Not sulking. Just observant. And once I stopped talking, I started seeing things I had missed. Claire had rhythms. Everybody does. You stop noticing them in marriage because repetition starts feeling like background noise. You know when they shower, how long they take getting dressed, when they check the mail, how they sound when they're actually tired versus pretending to be tired. You absorb all of it without meaning to. And when something changes, you feel it before you can explain it. Claire had started living in these little bursts of energy that had nothing to do with me. At home, she still moved with that controlled, low-temperature calm she had perfected. But certain days she had a charge under her skin. It showed up in small ways. She would change outfits twice before work. She would stand in front of the bathroom mirror with a concentration she never used for a night in with me. She'd answer simple questions with half her attention because some part of her was already elsewhere. I began keeping track without writing anything down. Tuesday and Thursday seemed different. More effort. More distraction. More checking the time. There were also work dinners that appeared suddenly and ended strangely late for events she always described as dull. If I asked how they were, she'd shrug and say the same things. Long. Pointless. Too much shop talk. Yet she always came home with this faint, lingering brightness around her, like some private current was still running through her. One Thursday, I decided not to ask anything at all. She came home a little after 11. I was on the couch with the TV on low, pretending I had fallen asleep there. I heard her keys hit the bowl by the door. Heard her heels come off. Heard the pause when she noticed I was still awake. She asked why I was still up. I said I couldn't sleep. She said the dinner ran long. Then she went to the kitchen for water. Usually that would have been the end of it. But when she walked past the lamp by the living room, I caught something that made my chest tighten. She was smiling to herself. Not broadly. Not drunkenly. Just a private, fading smile. The kind a person wears when they are replaying something they don't want interrupted. The second she noticed me looking, it disappeared. I lay awake long after she went upstairs, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying that tiny expression until it felt bigger than the whole room. The next week, I found the first thing that felt real. Not proof. Not yet. But real. Claire had left early for work, and I was in the home office printing something when I noticed our credit card account was still open on the browser from the night before. Usually I would have just closed it. Instead I looked. Nothing explosive jumped out at me. Grocery store. Gas station. Utility bill. But buried in the last 2 weeks was a charge from a hotel bar downtown. Not a hotel stay. Just the bar. Maybe that meant nothing. Work people met in hotels all the time. But Claire hated downtown traffic and always complained about overpriced places. If it had been a work event, why hadn't she mentioned it? Why did I only know about the dinners, never the places after? I clicked back through a little farther. There was another one from the same hotel bar 3 weeks earlier. Again, maybe nothing. But my pulse had already changed. That evening I asked her, casually, whether her team had started doing more events downtown. She looked up from chopping vegetables and said sometimes. I mentioned the hotel by name. She didn't freeze. She didn't stutter. She just said one of the directors liked that place for after-dinner drinks. After-dinner drinks. That was new. She had never once mentioned after-dinner drinks. I nodded like that answer made perfect sense and helped set the table while my mind kept turning over one ugly fact: she was adapting in real time. Not scrambling. Adapting. That was when the investigation stopped being abstract. I started building my days around attention. When Claire showered, I noticed whether she brought her phone into the bathroom. When she got dressed, I noticed which underwear she chose on nights she claimed were just routine work obligations. When she came home, I noticed whether she went straight to change clothes or stood in the hallway texting someone back before she even took off her coat. The hardest part was how ordinary everything still looked from the outside. There was no lipstick on collars. No dramatic lies collapsing under their own weight. No obvious affair movie mistakes. Just this slow, careful betrayal that lived in timing, tone, and the way her face came alive in places where I no longer existed. One night I heard her laugh in the guest room. It was subtle. She had said she was taking a late call because someone on her team had messed up a presentation and needed help before morning. I was downstairs in the kitchen rinsing out a glass when I heard it through the ceiling. Not a big laugh. Just a soft one. Warm. Instinctive. The kind that escapes you before you remember yourself. I stood there with water running over my hand and waited to hear it again. Nothing. When she came back down 20 minutes later, she looked composed, mildly annoyed, very much the woman handling a tedious work problem. She opened the fridge and asked if we had any sparkling water left. I watched her face and tried to imagine that same mouth making that sound for someone else. That image stayed with me so hard I barely slept. By then, I had started checking one thing every day: whether she kept her phone close because she was hiding messages, or because she was waiting for them. The answer came on a rainy Wednesday. She was in the laundry room moving close to the dryer, and her phone was on the kitchen island. It vibrated once. Then again almost immediately. Then a third time. Not random. A conversation. I told myself to leave it alone. Instead I walked closer. The screen lit just enough for me to see a name at the top before it dimmed again. Ethan. No last name. Just Ethan. My whole body went cold. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't unlock anything. I just stood there staring at my own reflection in the black screen after it went dark, hearing the dryer thump in the next room like my heartbeat had been moved outside me. When Claire came back in, she saw me near the island and her eyes flicked to the phone immediately. It was fast. Barely there. But I saw it. I asked, as evenly as I could, who Ethan was. She took half a second too long. Then she said he was new at work. Some consultant. Why? I said his name kept popping up. She gave a small shrug and said he'd been asking questions about a project she was handling. Then she picked up the phone and slid it into her pocket with that same practiced calm. I said nothing else. But inside, something had shifted from suspicion into shape. A name changes everything. Until then, I had been fighting fog. Philosophy. Distance. Vibes. Once there was a name, there was a direction my mind could travel in. Ethan became the point everything started orbiting around. The hotel bar. The late dinners. The guest room call. The smile she wore when she thought no one was looking. Even Nina saying Claire seemed more like her old self. Suddenly all of it felt less like marriage decaying and more like energy being rerouted. I hated how much it hurt. That was the part nobody really talks about. It wasn't just jealousy. It was humiliation. The slow realization that while I had been taking her lectures seriously, while I had been trying to mature myself into acceptance, Claire may have been preserving all the passion she told me to stop asking for and handing it to someone with a first name on a locked screen. That weekend, she told me she had another department dinner on Thursday. I nodded and asked what time. She said probably late. I told her that was fine. And for the first time in our marriage, I was no longer waiting for my wife to tell me the truth. I was waiting to catch it without her. Thursday came with rain. Not a storm. Just that gray, Steady kind that makes everything outside look flat and exhausted. Claire left that morning in a cream blouse and dark slacks, carrying the same leather tote she always used for work. Nothing about her looked dramatic. Nothing about her looked like the kind of woman whose husband was spending the day trying to decide whether his marriage was ending. She kissed the air somewhere near my cheek on her way out and told me not to wait up because the department dinner would probably run long again. I told her to drive safe. Then I stood in the doorway after she left, listening to the rain hit the front steps, and felt something in me go still. I wasn't angry yet. Not in the clean, simple way people imagine. I was past that. What I felt was colder. Like all the emotion had been compressed into a hard little center that let me function. All day at work, I barely absorbed anything around me. Emails came in. Calls happened. I answered people. I nodded in meetings. But under all of it was one thought moving in a straight line: tonight I stopped guessing. Claire texted me around 6:30 and said dinner had started late. Then around 8:15 she said they'd probably go for drinks after because one of the directors wanted to keep talking through some project issues. That text actually made me breathe easier. Not because it was innocent. Because it was specific. She was getting more confident, and confident people get lazy. At a little after 9, I left the house. I didn't head downtown right away. I parked 2 blocks from the hotel bar I had seen on the credit card statement and sat there with the wipers moving back and forth, watching people pass under umbrellas. I remember thinking how ridiculous I felt. 40-year-old man in a car, hoping not to see his wife. Hoping and expecting the same thing. At 9:32, Claire's car turned onto the street. She parked in the garage attached to the hotel. For a second I just stared through my windshield, waiting for some reasonable explanation to walk itself into existence. A work dinner. A director. After drinks. Team event. Any of the lines she trained me to accept. Then I saw her get out. She wasn't with a group. She was alone. That was the moment the last part of me that still wanted to be wrong finally gave up. I waited a minute, maybe 2. Then I got out and crossed the street. The hotel lobby was warm and too bright, all polished stone and low music and people pretending their evenings meant more than they did. I walked past the bar entrance first. She wasn't there. I knew she wouldn't be. I stood by the elevators long enough to make myself sick, then went to the front desk and asked for the restaurant. There was one upstairs. Private lounge area. Corporate events, the clerk said. I thanked him and rode the elevator up with a man in a blue suit who smelled like gin. When the doors opened, I heard laughter from the end of the hall. Soft lighting. Half-full glasses. People spread across the lounge in little islands of conversation. And there she was. Claire was sitting on a low couch in the corner beside a man I had never seen before but recognized instantly anyway. Ethan. It had to be. He was leaning toward her, not touching her, but close in the way people get when they already know the distance has been crossed somewhere else. Claire had one hand around a drink and the other resting near his knee on the cushion between them. They were smiling in that quiet, absorbed way two people smile when the rest of the room has stopped mattering. No one around them looked surprised. That hit me almost as hard as seeing them. This wasn't an accidental moment. This wasn't 2 co-workers getting carried away. Their body language had history in it. Familiarity. Ease. Other people had clearly seen them together before and filed it away as normal. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds before Claire looked up. I will remember that change in her face for the rest of my life. First confusion. Then recognition. Then a kind of bloodless shock so total it erased every expression she knew how to perform. She stood too fast. Ethan turned and looked at me, then at her, then back at me, already understanding enough to become very still. Nobody rushed over. Nobody made a scene. The music kept playing. Glasses kept clinking. That almost made it uglier. My marriage was cracking open in public, and the room had the decency to pretend not to notice. Claire walked toward me and said my name under her breath like she could still control the volume of what was happening. I asked her, just as quietly, if this was the boring department dinner. She said we should talk outside. I looked past her at Ethan, who had stood now but wasn't moving. He had the expression of a man who knows he's been discovered but still hasn't decided how ashamed he needs to be. Then I looked back at Claire and asked if passion was only dead at home. That landed. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was true, and she knew it. Her face changed in a different way then. Less panic. More calculation. I could actually see her trying to decide which version of reality to hand me first. She said it wasn't what I thought. I almost laughed. Not because the line was cliché, but because after everything, After a year of being told that desire fades and mature love changes form and I needed to stop romanticizing the early years, that was still the best she had. I asked if Ethan was the consultant from work. She nodded once. I asked if the hotel bar charges were him too. She didn't answer. I asked if all those late calls, the after drinks, the bright mood everyone else got to see, were part of the same mature phase of marriage she'd been explaining to me. That was when tears finally came into her eyes, but even then I didn't feel what I expected. No satisfaction. No dramatic release. Just exhaustion. Bone-deep exhaustion. She said they had gotten close over the past few months. She said it hadn't started the way I was making it sound. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen. She said things between us had already been broken. That part almost got me. Not because it justified anything, but because it was the first honest sentence she'd spoken in a long time. Yes, things between us had been broken. But not in the way she wanted to frame it. They had been broken by her turning her distance into a philosophy and making me live under it while she made private exceptions. I asked her one question then. Just one. I asked whether she ever actually believed the things she told me. About marriage. About passion fading. About how wanting your wife was childish after enough years. Claire looked at me, and for the first time all night, she had no polished answer. That was my real reveal. Not Ethan. Not the hotel. Not even the affair itself. It was that silence. Because in that silence, I finally understood that all those calm speeches had never been wisdom. They were strategy. They were a way to lower my expectations while she gave the part of herself I was mourning to someone else. She reached for my arm then, maybe out of panic, maybe habit. I stepped back. I told her not to do that. Her hand dropped. I said I was going home, and when she came back, she could sleep in the guest room or pack a bag. I told her we would deal with the rest when I could stand to hear her voice without feeling sick. Then I left. She called after me once in the hallway, not loudly, just my name. I didn't turn around. The drive home felt longer than it should have. The rain had gotten lighter, and the roads were mostly empty. I kept waiting for some dramatic breakdown to hit me. Rage. Tears. Anything cinematic enough to match the moment. But what I felt was much simpler. I felt done. Not healed. Not calm. Just done. Claire came home a little before midnight. I heard her moving around upstairs, heard the guest room door close, and stared at the dark ceiling until morning. Looking back, the cheating hurt. Of course it did. But the part that cut deepest was what came before it. Being trained to doubt my own loneliness. Being told that wanting closeness was immaturity. Being asked to call neglect normal while someone else got the version of her she insisted no longer existed. Maybe passion does change in a long marriage. Maybe it does quiet down and take a different shape. But it does not disappear for one person and magically come alive for another by accident. And I learned something I should have learned much sooner. The moment someone starts calling your hunger unreasonable while feeding someone else, the marriage is already telling you the truth.